Welcome back. Now, the Raisina Dialogue is a multilateral conference held annually in New Delhi. Now, during this year's event, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has slammed the United Nations over the matter of Kashmir. He's argued that what was initially an invasion by Pakistan has been reframed by a dispute by the United Nations, equating the attacker and the victim. He highlighted this as an example of the double standards in global governance, where principles like sovereignty and territorial integrity were undermined for geopolitical reasons. Jaishankar also pointed out that the occupation of parts of Kashmir by Pakistan represents the longest standing illegal occupation of a territory since the Second World War.
I would argue that any country which will take risks, which will have extreme positions, which would test the system, will actually use disorder to its advantage. I mean, we've seen in our own neighborhood, you don't have to be a big country to be a risky country. I have some smaller neighbors who've done a pretty good job at that. After the Second World War, the longest standing illegal, I would say, presence, occupation of a territory by another country pertains to India. What we saw in Kashmir. Now, we went to the UN. What was an invasion was made into a dispute. So the attacker and the victim were put on par. Who were the culpable parties? UK, Canada, Belgium, Australia, USA.
Now, the External Affairs Minister also emphasized on the need for a strong and fair United Nations and a consistent international order.
We speak today of political interference. When the West goes out into other countries, it's apparently in pursuance of democratic freedoms. When other countries come into the West, it seems to have a very malign intention. So I think we need, if to have an order, there must be fairness. I agree with you, Dominic, we need a strong UN, but a strong UN requires a fair UN. A strong, a global order must have some basic consistency of standards.
Now, remember, this comes just days after Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in an interview with the US-based podcaster and AI researcher Lex Fridman, had also spoken about global conflicts and the role of international organizations. Listen into what he had said then.
जो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगठन पैदा हुई है करीब करीब इरेलेवेंट हो गए, उसमें कोई रिफॉर्म नहीं हो रहा है। यूएन जैसे संस्थाएं अपनी भूमिका अदा नहीं कर सकते हैं। दुनिया में जो लोग कानून की नियमों की परवाह नहीं करते, वो सब कुछ कर रहे हैं, कोई रोक नहीं पा रहा है। तो ऐसी स्थितियों में बुद्धिमानी यही होगी कि सब लोग संघर्ष का रास्ता छोड़ करके समन्वय के रास्ते पर आगे आए और विकासवाद का रास्ता सही होगा, विस्तारवाद का रास्ता काम नहीं आएगा। और जैसा मैंने पहले ही कहा, दुनिया इंटरडिपेंडेंट है, इंटरकनेक्टेड है, हर किसी को हर एक की जरूरत है, कोई अकेला कुछ नहीं कर सकता है। और मैं देख रहा हूं कि जितने अलग अलग फोरम में मुझे जाना होता है, उसमें चिंता सबको सता रही है संघर्ष की।
So let's go across to my guest to ask this very important question. Is the United Nations truly irrelevant and does it need reform? I'm being joined by Mr. P.K. Mishra, who's the ex-additional DG of BSF. He's, of course, served extensively in Jammu and Kashmir. Also, I'm being joined by Suresh Kumar Goyal, who's a former ambassador, and, of course, Pathikrit Payne, Geo-Political Analyst at this point. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining me. I'll begin with you, Pathikrit. A most simple question which has been raised twice, first by the Prime Minister and then by the External Affairs Minister. Is the United Nations truly at the risk of being redundant, obsolete and unnecessary, if not openly partisan?
Well, Ritangshu, I'm not aware of any example in the last, say, 80 years where somebody went to UN and UN has been able to solve that issue. I mean, as President Mr. Jaishankar mentioned about its inability to distinguish between an invasion and a dispute, UN has completely failed till date to prevent any dispute in this world from taking the shape of a conflict. Right now, look at this. The Ukraine conflict has been going on for the last 3 years. Tell me one time the Secretary General of United Nations came up and gave a firm statement that this issue has to be solved. Give me one example of any place in the world where United Nations peacekeeping force went and it has been able to solve the problem or prevent the conflict from aggravating. You will never find any example. And let me tell you, in Kashmir, the UN peacekeeping force guys were the first to get into the bunker when the shelling used to start from the other side. Now, this is the condition of United Nations. Let me tell you, United Nations is part of this entire Bretton Woods system, which was started after the 1945 end of the Second World War. So it deliberately has, it is embedded in the United Nations to further the interest of the Anglo-Saxon Western lobby. It doesn't take care of anybody else. Prime Minister Modi has talked about for a long period of time that there is a persistent need for reform in the multilateral institutions. When it comes to an issue in a country
Exactly.
like Sri Lanka, where it was on the verge of bankruptcy, tell me one United Nations institution which came to help. Nobody came. When the entire COVID crisis was going on, India went ahead and gave COVID vaccines to more than 100 countries. How many did UN go out of the way to help? When the earthquake struck in Turkey, India was ahead of United Nations in sending a disaster relief entire team. So you have to introspect where United Nations went wrong and whether they are just there to actually speak what the West wants them to speak. They talk about genocide. They have been consistent. The West has been consistent about criticizing Putin about the Ukraine conflict. They have been talking about that he should be tried for war crimes. Have you ever heard about a single incident where United Nations Secretary General comes up and speak about the genocide that happened in Iraq, that happened in, say, Libya, that happened in Afghanistan? Have they ever questioned the President of United States or the NATO for that matter? Yugoslavia was bombed for 75 days, the Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia. Now, what was the stand of United Nations in that? So an institution which in the last 80 years has failed to even define what terrorism stands for. Please tell me what is the relevance of this organization. The UNRWA, which is present in the Gaza Strip, has been hand in glove with the Hamas terrorists. So where does the credibility of United Nations exist today? And tell me one country which still believes that I can go to United Nations and I can get solution for the problem that I face. And this is the reason when the Voice of Global South Summit happens, and in India and more than 120 developing countries participate in that vindicates that there is a declining trust in the whole institution of United Nations. It doesn't mean, Ritangshu, that we should do away with United Nations, but there has to be introspection. If United Nations has to be stronger, it has to be fairer. It has to take into account
and that's an important point of caution which the opposition has also raised, that we can't completely join hands or echo the voices coming in from a Trump administration which sees things only in black and white and say that the United Nations is completely redundant as well. But having said that, Ambassador Goel, a very key point which Mr. Jaishankar raised in the Raisina Dialogue was that this hyphenation of the equation of the villain and the victim in this case, the villain obviously being Pakistan, which broke international norms and illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir after the instrument of accession was signed, and victim, which is India, of course, which has been at the receiving end for so many years. For some reason, the world diplomacy equates both of us on the same level as both parties as part of an international dispute, and therefore the same old homilies come in of, yes, talks is the only way to solve it, it's a bilateral issue and so and so. Isn't this a strategic misstep in decades of diplomacy that we have not been able to change this narrative till now when the External Affairs Minister has finally spoken about it?
Tanshu, thank you very much. First of all, let me begin by saying one thing. I have known Ambassador Jaishankar ever since I began my career. He is 1 year senior to me in service, and I'm a great admirer of diplomat Ambassador Jaishankar, foreign service professional. And yesterday I listened to Minister Jaishankar at the Raisina Dialogue, and I must say that my admiration and my praise for Minister Jaishankar has gone up several notches high. And Prime Minister Modi was far more diplomatic and guarded in what he said as compared to Minister Jaishankar. Hats off to him for saying what the truth is. Now, coming to basically victim, etc., equation, juxtaposition and all those things. Listen, the whole world is, just leave the whole world, even a society, there are these paradoxes of the victims and the victimized, victims and the victor. There always is. World War II, what was it? And therefore, if we carry a notion that there can be a parity between the victim and the victor, forget it. The United Nations Security Council was created on the pattern of the victor and the others. And the United Nations functioned very well for the first 30 years because there were those who were weaker and those who were actually victimized, less powerful, and therefore they depended upon the more powerful, like Europe, USA, etc., to safeguard their interests. Non-alignment. What was non-alignment? Non-alignment was basically moving into the space, very limited space that we had on the margins, with Russia, Soviet Union on one side, USA on the other, Europe on the other. And we had to negotiate that very narrow space to be basically more secure and guard our own interests. Therefore, first of all, let us not live under an illusion that the world can be fair. Okay? The world has never been fair, and the world will never be fair. The world will only have powerful, less powerful, and the weak countries. And that's the truth. And the fact is, and that's the reason I admire Jaishankar, Mr. Jaishankar, because he spoke the truth. And therefore, if we were able to safeguard our interests despite politically, despite being on the weak wicket, is because we were able to build a coalition of countries together with us called the G77 or non-alignment, Global South, etc., etc. If today our voice is heard, it is basically because we are economically stronger, militarily we are emerging, we are going to the fifth largest economy, good market, etc., etc., etc. But if we live under the illusion that we can be respected only because of this, again, no. We have to use the leverages we have in terms of securing what we want to. And that is what he was referring to, that Europe decided what territorial integrity is. Treaty of Westphalia, they decided it. They decided what sovereignty is. We have to define our own terms. We have to define our own strategy, how we go about it. And I think we are now able to say clearly that Pakistan has been the occupier. Pakistan has violated the rules of the international order. They are occupying Jammu and Kashmir. And I think we will have to really then go about how we secure our interests. Sorry, Ritangshu, I spoke for a long time, but the fact is...
I love this equivalence. I love this equivalence. For the Western world, what Russia did in February 2022 is a clear act of violation of international norms, taking over another country's sovereign territory. And over that, there's been such a hue and a cry, yet there's absolute silence over what happened in 1947. P.K. Mishra, you are someone who has served extensively in Jammu and Kashmir, and you know the region very well. The cost which we have borne in terms of hanging on to Jammu and Kashmir for the past several decades, in terms of money, in terms of loss of lives, in terms of so many other qualifiables. Does this all stem down to the fact that perhaps in 1947, we were not in a position to really challenge this dubious framing of the narrative as a dispute between two sides equally placed in terms of morality, and not be able to frame it as ourselves as the victims and as Pakistan as the illegal intruders, which is why we are suffering till date?
Yes, I can well tell you. Of course, you have asked me. I have served there for more than 17 years in Kashmir. And it's not that United Nations doesn't know what has happened in 1947. Even till today, they know that we are being bombarded. Yeah. Even today, they know that jihadis are being trained opposite side and they are having launching pads. Even today, United Nations, they know that jihadis are being trained and they are being given weapons, sophisticated weapons, and they are entering our country. And they know it very well. It from 1947, our land, our Pak occupied Kashmir, that Indian land is there under their position. Yet, what action United Nations has taken? I'm very clearly telling that I really appreciate what Mr. Jaishankar has stated yesterday in Raisina Dialogue. I really salute him. We are one of the best External Affairs Minister now. And we have to be
Hmm.
heard. I know that what Mr. Jaishankar has told, that a strong and fair United Nations is required. United Nations is not failing only with India. They are failing in Balochistan. Have they not seen what is happening in Balochistan, how Pakistan army and Chinese army, they are
So then,
behaving in Balochistan? They
sir, let me
also know
ask you:
what
do
is
we
happening.
need a United Nations at all, Mr. PK Mishra? Do
Yeah.
we, when we have established the United Nations, in your own words, has failed in several key conflict
Yes,
zones, and even including West Asia and what has happened in
no
Ukraine.
doubt.
When you have admitted the United Nations is inherently racist and has a power imbalance, do we need the United Nations at all? Let me ask you a very
Yes,
provocative question.
I am very frank. I am very frank in telling it. What has happened in Raisina Dialogue, what's happening? India has gone for this Global South Summit, and that is democratic
Hmm.
polity and market economy and respect for faith. And they are combining also the South Global Summit, and most of the countries are combining. We should we should have intimacy with all. It's not only the neighbors. And we have to find out way, as Honorable Prime Minister was speaking, every country has to behave. They have to listen to others. Every country will be getting the help from others, and they have to help others. Look what we have done in COVID, what we have done in Turkey, what we have done in earthquake in Nepal.
Hmm.
United Nations has never given a small word in favor of India. He is finished, and United Nations, in fact, it has failed in every aspect. I am telling you very frankly, of course, people will mind it. This present Secretary General is one of the worst Secretary General in the history of the United Nations. I am sorry to tell it, because he has failed in
Okay.
every angle. We don't need United Nations. We need all our countries with whom we are having good support, we are having friendship, we are having one-to-one diplomacy, and we are having very good
Okay.
terms.
So
Our problem. We
So
are
you're coming
able
up
to
with two
solve. We are
statements. So you
having a
say
good
that we
economy.
don't need the United Nations and we need to have individual relations with countries. I'll put both those questions to my guests at this point. Thank you, Mr. Mishra, for giving us these two very important talking points. Ambassador Goel, I'm going to ask you on the latter. If there is one takeaway that we have seen from recent geopolitics, it's that the policy of having a global world order or League of Nations or a liberal or international order, that has failed here. The world works in country-to-country relations, country-to-country diplomacy, which is why we're looking at a multipolar order. Is that the way forward, even in terms of building up consensus in Kashmir? Because we're never going to get the United Nations General Assembly or the Security Council on a whole to agree to what India's stand is.
What you have said just now reminds me of the eternal debate in the Ministry of External Affairs, where there are two distinct groups. One group is the multilateralists who believe in the United Nations, Geneva, New York, etc., disarmament and everything. And there is the other group, and I will not take the names. And there is the other group which firmly believes in entirely bilateralism, that bilateral relations are far more important. They're both important. The fact is that we need a forum where all the countries of the world are represented and they can talk to each other, whether there is a solution or not. But talking does help. So United Nations provides that forum where every country in the General Assembly has one vote. It may not have any impact, but the voice is heard. And therefore, I will not do away with the United Nations with all its faults and everything. It is important, but you cannot just depend upon the multilateralism without bilateral component of it. Because bilateral relations are the ones where you actually leverage your strengths, where you actually work with each other in terms of developing connections and all that. So both have to be done. In the case of India, what has happened is that we are now becoming gradually stronger to have a say in the multilateral affairs. We had different bilateral connections even earlier, and they are coming to help us in terms of working of the synergies, bilateral matrices. It's important. So both we need to have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're saying that it has to be a assiduous mixture and combination of multilateralism and bilateralism. Pathikrit, I'll come to you for the last word. You mentioned in your opening remarks that the United Nations cannot be done away with. It needs to be engaged intelligently and responsibly here. What is the best way in which India can continue to leverage the preeminence the United Nations have, but at the same time not be reliant on it for any actual change on the ground?
Ritangshu, we have stopped depending on United Nations for quite some time, and it is the onus is on United Nations to show demonstrable action that it is relevant today. For the formality's sake, we will still be part of United Nations, and you might have noticed that the Prime Minister has stopped going to the UNGA in the recent past, and that shows the diminishing relevance. And at the same time, the fact that there is increasing prominence and popularity of multilateral forums like the BRICS or the G20, which is now G21, is an indication that developing countries have stopped depending and hoping from United Nations to give a fair deal. And unfortunately, I just want to add what PK Mishra ji stated. I believe most of the UN staff, the only thing they wait for is to get the paycheck at the end of the month, which comes from the Western sponsors. That is it. So unless they reform themselves, unless they show that they're reliable, unless they can get back the credibility, for formality's sake, we will still be part of United Nations, but for all practical purposes, we would have bilateral relations, and we would be developing alternate multilateral forums like BRICS, like G20, like Voice of Global South, and this is a big slap on the face of the Secretary General of United Nations and the United Nations as an institution, which unfortunately has become nothing but the bidder of their Western masters. That is the reality of the United Nations, and we should stop expecting from it. We should not expect at all. We should do, and in fact, let me tell you, when the Balakot airstrike happened, we did not seek any kind of approval from United Nations for it, because we knew they will not do anything.
I think
what's happening in Bangladesh.
I think, Pathikrit, we can all agree that India has stopped expecting anything from the United Nations a long time back. I think what's more important is for the United Nations and the liberal Westphalian international order, which puppeteers the United Nations, stop expecting anything from India back in return when we have got no support and when the hypocrisy, as Jaishankar has pointed out, is clear and present and staring us in the face. Thank you so much, Pathikrit, Ambassador Goel, and also Mr. PK Mishra for joining us on such an important debate. It's time for a short commercial. More news and updates continue on the other side. Stay tuned to Mirror Now.